All right. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to the Creatives panel. My name is Hafsa, and I will be your moderator today. Just some housekeeping before we begin. We kindly ask if you're comfortable doing so to turn on your cameras as it will allow our panelists to really engage with you guys. We also ask that you keep your mics muted until the Q&A portion of the panel where you can ask questions, or we'll also be putting a Google form in the chat where you can ask questions there as well. And finally, if everyone could change your Zoom names to your name followed by your school, that would be wonderful. Let me begin by introducing our panel for today. So our first speaker is Aisha Alan. Aisha has a degree in social work and is pursuing a degree in Islamic studies at Mishkat University. She is the founder of a nonprofit called The Strangers Poets, which is a movement for Muslim writers. The Strangers provide a platform for Muslim writers as well as resources such as podcasts and blogs. You can find The Strangers at mymuslimvoice.com. Aisha is also a writer and currently working on her debut novel. Our next two speakers are Sarah and Yusra Talala. Sarah and Yusra graduated in 2019 with a BFA in Design and Printmaking from Rutgers, New Brunswick's Mason Gross School of the Arts. Sarah is currently a junior designer at NBC Universal. In addition to her current role, she is a photographer at the Center for Islamic Life at Rutgers University and a freelance designer. Previously, she was a designer at Gray Advertising, where she worked at for a variety of clients, including Emergency, TJ Maxx, YouTube, and Canon. She's passionate about using the arts to make a difference. Her work can be viewed at sarahdallah.com. Yusra is a designer and illustrator at Mequilibrium, an AI-based resilience training platform for companies and teams. She's also a freelance package designer at Alia Foods and a freelance designer for the Center for Islamic Life at Rutgers University. Yusra is also a graduate from 100 Roses from Concrete's Growth Initiative, an eight-week virtual advertising agency program. She has additionally freelanced at Fig Agency in Manhattan, working with brands such as Benjamin Moore, Virgin Atlantic, Equitable, and Seaborn. Her work could be viewed at yusraathallah.com. Sarah and Yusra are also co-founders of Muslim Feminists for the Arts at Rutgers University. And our final speaker is Mehreen Kareem. Mehreen is a women's health and communications professional and a food nerd. Her life has typically centered around two things: what she's craving and what's going on in the world of sexual and reproductive rights. She was most recently managing digital communications at the International Women's Health Coalition. All the while, she dabbled in food blogging and media with the debut of her food blog, I Make This. She inspires people to cook and bake flavors that they may not have imagined would go together. One could technically call her a freelance writer and recipe developer, having written for Bon Appetit and other brands. Ooh, that was a lot. So now that we know who our speakers are, let's get to why we're here today. Many of us have interests, but we don't know where to get started in making them more than just an interest. Our speakers today will talk about their journey that got them into their creative outlet and how they made something more of it. We will then send you to breakout rooms based on your responses to the form you completed earlier. So I'm going to start off by asking all of our panelists some questions today so that we can get to know them more and their creative journey. So my first question is, what inspired each of you to get into your specific creative outlet? I can start with Mehreen.
Hi, assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thanks for having me here. I think a good way to start this, if you heard in my bio, I have a couple of different interests, and I never really solidified or typecasted myself into any one label or interest until like last week. Like I got a job last week to write for Bon Appetit. But before that, I had really been doing photography. I had been volunteering for I worked with Heart Women and Girls to just help with their social media because I thought I could help write their captions or design some of their graphics for them. I did a lot of volunteer work whenever I saw a problem that I thought I knew how to fix. And I usually did so for organizations or people whose like purpose or goal inspired me. So that being said, I didn't really know I wanted to go into food photography because honestly, I just started taking photos of my friends when I was a freshman in college, and then that turned into people asking me to take their portraits, and that turned into me cooking every single day, and people asking me how I made something, and then just taking more photos of how I made it. And then eventually I made a blog last year that my husband's a web designer and graphic designer, so he created that for me. So it really, I think it just has to do with making sure you continue executing and creating things that feel natural to you, and then allowing yourself to come across opportunities and say yes to them whenever you can. And then sooner or later someone calls you something like, oh, she's a writer, or like, oh, she's a cook, and you don't really think of yourself that way because we tend to be so humble and not label ourselves, but eventually you'll feel comfortable doing so.
Awesome. Sarah or Yusra, would you like to go next?
For me, a lot of people in my family were actually artistic. Some of them did go to college for the arts, but some of them didn't. And I found the inspiration from that, and I basically just decided to go for it. So I started drawing and painting at a really young age, and I just kept at it, and until I eventually convinced my parents that I could go to the school for the arts, which can be a little difficult to convince other generations that you could do that. But I would say that you need to really make sure that you're showing really good evidence of jobs on the market, of just the fact that people want you to do work for them. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into my journey. And then, I went to Rutgers to study, and that, helped me so much. And connecting with people, making sure to not put down work that people ask me for, and everyone should know what you do. So everyone knows that I'm a graphic designer. Basically, anyone who meets me will know that, and that will always make sure that you don't burn any bridges.
Oh, I think you're muted.
Yeah, sorry about that. So for me, I had a very similar journey where I also started out, in high school, just with visual arts, and then moving on to, I chose graphic design as something that could be some kind of, what's the word, financial stability situation. But something interesting happened for me where I started out as a graphic designer, and then I had a mentorship program with 101 Roses from Concrete. And through that, what ended up happening was I ended up building a lot of illustrations in my graphic design, which then, whenever my mentor would see some illustrations, he'd be like, oh, why don't you make another one with illustration? Why don't you make another one with illustration? So now I'm both a designer and an illustrator in my current job. It just happened to be where they hired me for design, and then they were kind of like, why don't you be our illustrator? So that's my journey.
Nice. And Aisha?
I just want to first point out that I just noticed that Sister Sarah and us are twins. Are you guys sisters twins? Oh my gosh, that's so
yes, we are.
cute. SubhanAllah. Okay, sorry, I just had to make that point first. So I kind of what drew me to my passion was actually my sister, Kashmir, and she'd been performing spoken word poetry for a while, and I was always trying to find a way to express myself, and the way which kind of just I fell naturally into was the art of words. And just saying that the art of words, it's not just specifically for poetry, it's just a way that I personally find that I'm able to express myself better. I'm not great at expressing myself at words sometimes, because naturally I am an introvert. So I find it hard to kind of communicate my thoughts at times, even though there's a lot going on there. So I turn to writing instead. And I remember when I actually took up spoken word poetry, I knew what was attached to it was the performance aspect, and I would go on the stage and I would literally shake, my hands would be shaking, and they probably still would be right now, but subhanAllah, after time you kind of got used to it until there just came a time where it became just something that was you did. It was alhamdulillah. but yeah, that's basically how I got into it. And I still love to write poetry and also other forms of writing, which I'm working on my debut novel right now, alhamdulillah. So I'm really excited about that. And yeah, that's basically my journey. I'll shut up.
Amazing. Thank you guys for sharing. The next question is, what advice would you give to someone who has a passion for something but feels pressured into pursuing a more typical career? Anyone who wants to answer that?
I can go. This is a very unbaked answer because honestly, everybody has different circumstances. And I can't speak for the people that I know have goals of pursuing a degree or career that will help them provide for their family, for example. I personally didn't have that goal in mind. So I don't think my answer will really explain like what everyone should do by any means. But as a general rule of thumb, this also might be unhealthy, but I always told myself that whatever I'm doing, whatever I love doing, whatever I want to pursue, there's somebody out there who's spending more time learning about it, more time acting on it, and believing in themselves a little bit more than I am. And so that wasn't to make me compare myself to others, but it was to make me realize that the time that I spend doubting myself, I could use learning the thing that I think I'm not able to do. And eventually, with my parents specifically, they weren't excited for me to go into public health, sexual and reproductive health growing up, but I showed them how I was able to combine my skills in communications, like digital communications, which kind of entails writing and photography and like visual design, or at least a knowledge of these things, and tie it into one technical skill that in fact a lot of nonprofits that did honorable work wanted somebody to do for them. And so basically I just had to prove to them and show them examples of other people that had the types of dream jobs that I was aspiring to achieve one day, and show them every step of the way. I guess like transparency is the answer, is like not waiting to just like get the best job out there that you know is going to be prestigious in their eyes, but show them at least like the steps you're taking and the plan that you have. And that means just creating a plan in general.
Absolutely. Going off of that, definitely starting off just like, warming them up to it. They're not going to like immediately just be like, oh, that's awesome. Like, no, that's not how it works. You kind of have to like really like, slowly just be like, this is what I'm doing. Like, this is what I could do with it. And kind of like, you need to prove yourself. That's like first and foremost. So like you actually have to, do things where it's like, wow, like, okay, this has like some kind of value in it. And another thing, there are ways to compromise, which can be a little bit tricky, but like, for example, like I know some people work in healthcare advertising. So this is like a great way to have like, graphic design, but like you're speaking to doctors every day. You're like really, you have to understand what the medication is. You have to know how to talk about it. You have to know how to translate it for the doctor. Things like that. And it's very creative. It's high paying work. So these are definitely like things to think about.
Yeah, I was going to mention something like along the lines of that. If you're in a situation where finances are really the big point, you should come up with a list basically of the different things that you could do. So for example, graphic design, there's basically levels of like, okay, this is going to pay this much. So for example, nonprofit, that's like the lowest, right? If you don't care about finances, go into nonprofit, you'll be fine. If you really want to make a lot of money, so you would do like UX design, for example. So you could like start at 80K, or you could do, as she mentioned, healthcare advertising or advertising in general. That's especially in the Manhattan area, that's like some of the highest paying jobs that you could get. So those types of things, like you could use as a backup and focus that on that in your college experience. And that would definitely help combat the financial issue.
And definitely make sure you have an internship and something that's going to give you money to begin with, because that will help you along the way.
Definitely. I think that's a really good question. And I'm honestly, I'm not really sure how to answer it, because as Mehreen said, it's just something that's really personal to everyone. They have their own journeys, they have their own relationship with their families, and they know best how to communicate that. But I guess speaking from my own experience, kind of like growing up from a community that I was a part of, whenever I would talk seriously about, you know, the Strangers Project, for example, being a realistic thing which I wanted to do with my life, like a career, it was always like, yeah, but make sure you get a degree. You can have that in your spare time. You can do that for fun, but you got to make sure you get a degree. And I always kind of felt like as if I didn't really feel validated in my choice of doing this. So what I did was I pursued a degree in teaching initially. And this was when I moved to America. I'm originally born and raised in England, and I moved here when I was 22 years old. And the first degree that I pursued was childhood education, because I thought that was, you know, what I wanted to do. I wanted to make a change, positive change to society through educating the youth and kind of growing them up in empowering them, you know. But then as I started taking the course, I took 2 years of it, and I just kind of took a moment to breathe. And once I began to think about it, I realized that this isn't what I want to do, not this specific thing. So I took a break. I took 2 or 3 years break. And within that break, I actually, it's called Moratorium. There's a psychological word for it. And in that break, I took time just kind of figuring things out, but I wanted to stay productive. So what I did was I founded an organization called the Strangers Poets, during that time where I was kind of thinking about everything, thinking about what I wanted to do with my life. And I didn't even think of this as a career. I just thought of it as something like, you know, something productive to do, to give back to society, instead of just kind of not doing anything at all, which I felt like I wasn't doing. So as time went by, I began to realize that this was a grassroots movement. It began as a grassroots movement. Now it's moving gradually online. And there was a lot of aspects to it where there was da'wah, you know, you were teaching people about Islam, and we did it through poetry, which was kind of like very new and kind of cool at the time as well. We'd go on subways, etc. But then it was a lot of community work involved as well. We had another branch, which was more charity driven, where we gave to the homeless, etc. And it's not just me who founded this organization. It was actually my sister Kashmir as well. So as I'm thinking about what I want to do with my life, I'm just kind of going with what's coming to me in my life. And this was one of them things. I'm not going to go into the whole story of the Strangers Project, but it really got me to a stage where I felt like, okay, I want to give back to the community somehow. What can I do that is, you know, a degree which will allow me to do that and become more educated in the life I want to live, you know, because I truly feel like Allah has created us in certain ways where we have skills, and we are meant to use them skills in order to better the world that we live in. Not just to me personally, I don't think following your passion is enough. I think if you use that passion for a greater good, then it's going to make so much more of a beautiful change. You can use food to unite people. You can use graphic design to enlighten people, and you can do so many things with your writing as well. So that's basically what happened with the Strangers. And then as time went along, I went to a college which is around my area, Queens, and York. It's called York College. I'm based in New York. And I just kind of thought, and I'm like, okay, I think I'm going to try social work. And so I tried it. I went into my first class. I remember her name is Selena Rogers, the professor. And as soon as she started talking about what social work was, and she was talking about this concept called Generalist Approach, meaning basically you do a little bit of everything in social work. There's activism involved. You deal with the community. You can deal with the youth. You can do, like, you know, you basically, these skills are transferable and they're universal. And I was like, this is what I want to do. So I took my degree, alhamdulillah, finished in the process, by the way, got married, had 2 kids, and alhamdulillah finished like last year. And, you know, I feel like that whole process, it took a while. And to many people, it felt like, okay, she's still not got her degree, because I was the oldest in the class most of the time, but I'm still living my life, you know, and trying to live my best life while on the side there's the Strangers. But now, alhamdulillah, it's full time. I can use my skills. But the point is just sometimes, you know, life will lead you in a certain direction, and follow it. You know, there's a reason why Allah is putting something in your path, and the reason why he's given you them skills. And if it's something you truly feel is going to benefit the world in a positive way, then just look at the signs, because there will always be signs and you'll be drawn to it, with a little bit of tying your camels as well, and doing something that makes sense. And then talk to your parents about it. That's obviously one of the most important things. You have to get them on your side. But once they see your passion, and once they see how much, you know, you want to do good for the world, because that's really why your parents, I mean, that's why I had my children. I wanted my babies to leave. I wanted to kind of like them leave some, I wanted to leave behind something in the world which was going to benefit me when I die. And I think Allah, like being Muslims, that's why your parents had you. And that's why your parents wanted that's why they want you to do something positive in the world, make a positive change. And I'm sure when you find that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will always put a way for you. And I pray that he does. I mean, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it very much did. I'm sure getting started is always the hardest part, but you guys all explained it very well. That
I have a follow-up question, Aisha. Whereabouts in England are you from?
I'm gonna test you. Like, which part of England do you know?
So my mom's entire family's from England. So it sounds like a Manchester accent to me. I'm not 100% sure, but
Right.
that's my guess.
That's a very good guess, actually. SubhanAllah. Manchester is 40 minutes away from where I am from, which is West
Okay.
Yorkshire. You guys all know what West Yorkshire is when who's seen Lord of the Rings? Everyone's seen Lord of the Rings, right? The Hobbit. Yeah, basically I'm from where the Hobbits are from, the Shire. But yeah, we have that accent. And I don't have the typical Yorkshire accent, but I'm from Leeds. Leeds.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, because my cousins are actually from Manchester, and their accent sounds exactly the same.
Yeah, Manchester has more of like we say Manchester, I say Manchester, but they say Manchester. So it's like
Yeah, kind of. It's like the accent's more emphasized, a
yeah.
bit more than a London accent, which my mom has. So, and it's not as deep
Oh
as
yeah.
other accents.
I love
I was just wondering. That's why. Sorry.
Oh, absolutely.
all right. Well, following up with the previous question, the Muslim community usually doesn't give much importance to creative careers. What are some ways we can remove these stigmas?
Invest in the talent, for sure. So if you know that you are, let's say, starting up a business, hire people who will help you to brand that business in the best way possible and pay them good money. That's my answer.
Love that straightforward answer. At the end of the day, that's always going to be like what's most necessary in addition to like the frilly answers. The only other thing I would say is I think as like creatives or just anyone who has a hobby and is Muslim at the same time feel the need to like justify it to the community and say like, oh, well, I'm doing this to help like this Muslim business, or like I know I felt that way when I was interested in sexual and reproductive health. Like I made sure, one, because I cared about the like Muslim women community, but I know that I got a lot of buy-in because it looked like I was giving back to the Muslim community. And that's wonderful. And I enjoyed doing that for the time I did, but realizing that as someone who is good at something, is creative in one way or another, you don't always have to give back. You don't have to pigeonhole yourself into like one organization or like one, I don't know if this is coming across correctly, but I know that when I'm like creating recipes, for example, that I'm aware that like my audience expects me to create recipes that are like specifically geared towards like Eid or Ramadan or like, and which I'm definitely going to do because that's part of my identity, but knowing that every other day of the year, like you're allowed to create whatever you want. And that's kind of what legitimizes you in the field as a whole as well, is just like exploring as much as you want without pigeonholing yourself to your own like political identity.
Would anyone else like to touch on that?
I think they pretty much said it all. I think there's definitely a need for it to be seen and taken seriously for what you love to do. And it's unfortunate, but a lot of creatives, they're not taking that seriously. But, you know, maybe it might be an idea to go do what you love to do, but also do something that coincides with it, so you have a safety net. That's what my dad always told me. He said, make sure you have a safety net. Make sure if you are not able to make money from what you love to do, just have something which you are doing as a day job in a way, which kind of contributes to that, builds your skills, but at the same time, you're not losing your passion, and you're not kind of falling financially, if that makes sense.
I think, so there's a lot of talent in our community. There's a lot of people that, especially once COVID hit, they started businesses, whether that's, you know, like cooking, or whether it's design, or like an Etsy shop or anything like that. So I think there's a huge market, and I've seen especially a lot of new and old designers, honestly, or artists or anything like that, that have been very successful. And I think supporting those people, learning about those people, so like your education is very important. Don't just look at look at people like yourself, not just, you know, the people you learn about in school, like, you know, like Van Gogh, or like any of that stuff. So yeah, I think that's what I would say.
Yeah, that makes sense. Before we proceed with my questions, does anyone in the audience want to unmute themselves and ask any questions? All right, I guess not. Okay, so my next question is, what is something you wish you knew before you started your journey in your creative field? Anyone?
I guess I'll go. Okay, so I wish that I knew that you're gonna not everyone's gonna, and I know this sounds really cliched, but not everyone is going to see things the way you do. And that's why sometimes, like, for example, there'd be events that we'd be doing as the strangers, and some of them were like dawah tables. This is back in the day, in the grassroots level. And I would try and get as many people as possible to come and join me. But there was one time where there was these Charlie Hebdo, the incident of Charlie Hebdo happened. And I thought to myself, like, you know, this is the time when we need to be out there talking about what Islam represents. And I put a call out. I told everyone, like, you know, come join us. But two sisters, one with a niqab on, came and joined us in a subway station in Jackson Heights, Queens. And we ended up doing like a poetry thing at the actual dawah. But subhanallah, it was just crazy because they didn't understand, like, you won't always get people supporting you know, what you believe in, and sometimes you just need to take steps forward, and then people will begin to follow. So I think that that's just a really important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah,
I guess one thing I wish I knew was like going into graphic design, it's very competitive. So it's something that you definitely have to, you know, like invest in, like resources, like get you to where you want to be. Having mentors is something very important, and making sure you're in like some kind of like very esteemed, you know, program that will help you grow, rather than just focusing on school or something like that.
Something I wish I knew, not before my creative journey, but before I started freelancing, is to make sure you ask for money like right away. So what I do now is I ask for like 15% at least of the money beforehand, because a lot of people, even if they're your friends, like you'll do work for them and then they'll be like, I'm not paying you anymore, or like something like that, or like, I don't want to finish the project, and like you already put hours into it. So I would say when it comes to money, don't trust anyone and ask for it right away.
That's good advice. Marine, is there anything you'd like to add?
A lot of things that happened, a lot of the things I didn't know, it was okay because it led me to a spot which allowed me to like grow potentially. And otherwise, if I had known anything more than I had, then I wouldn't be where I am right now. But I would say just know that people are more willing to help than you think they are. And even if someone doesn't respond to your question on Instagram the first time, or like someone doesn't email you back, or somebody looks like a role model to you and they're really inspirational, chances are they really do want to help you, and they're like busy, social media is weird, I don't know, but you can always ask for help like more than once, and you can probably bother people more than you think you can to get help.
Right. Okay, the final question that we have is, what would you have done differently had you known the things you know now about this field?
I can have a short answer for that. I would have started taking myself seriously a lot earlier. I would have started like selling myself, but well, I would have not sold myself short, because I did that for a while. I always like humbled myself. I was like, oh, I've never taken like a cooking class before. However, there were more often than not, I knew a lot more and was sharing a lot more like valuable information than other people who claimed to know more than I did. And so like, just don't be afraid to like brand yourself and claim your stake in what you know from the get-go.
I think
For me,
continue.
go ahead. No, you go ahead first.
I'm sorry, Yusra. No, you go, please.
All right. For me, I think I spent a lot of time doing internships at Rutgers because I was comfortable there. But I think branching out to other places would have probably been a better idea, because it would get you like, like more concrete experience that you could have and show. I think I would have also spent more time. Okay, so I was designing printmaking. So printmaking is more like artsy, more, like it's more old school stuff. It's not necessarily things that I knew I wasn't going to use it, basically. So I wish I invested more time in design. But at the same time, I don't regret anything because it was a lot of fun. So that's what I would say.
That's excellent. I would say if you whatever you do, always have a source of knowledge there. And I don't just mean knowledge in the expertise, because it's so important to understand that whatever we do, someone will know better of how to do it. So these people, sometimes like they may not be huge followers for them, but they are people who are very valuable. And a perfect example is like a person of knowledge, I would say, in any field that you go to, in any project that you want to do, especially if it's creative, it's so important to have that source of Islamic knowledge. And the reason why I say that is because it grounds you, and it just kind of brings you back to the real reason, like what matters. Like that's what makes my work matter, and sometimes it's easy to lose sight in the glam of Instagram and social media and all of these things which just shout attention, so it's important to especially just have that kind of like that grounding knowledge. And an example is, for example, like Sheikh Hatham Alhaji, I don't know if you've heard of him, but he is an amazing asset to this community, especially in the tri-state area. But you can find his videos in YouTube, but he doesn't have hundreds and thousands of followers, but he's a teacher of people like Omar Suleiman, people like Muhammad al-Shanawi. He's the teacher of all these people, and he's so like not really I guess not really known as much as he should be. So I would say to my to my people, I was going to say to our listeners, definitely just have that knowledge. And Sheikh Hatham Al-Hajj is a wonderful asset for the youth. So check that out, inshallah. He's on YouTube, Hatham Al-Hajj.
I would say have a mentor. Make sure you have a mentor in the field. There's a lot of people like us, for example, that will be willing to give our time to help you out, to whether it's with the school process, like the portfolio process, applying to college, or finding a job. I found my job through a mentor, and then my mentor like referred me to another mentor, and then that mentor, like I had another mentor after him. So the easiest way to get a job in the creative field is by knowing people that have jobs already. So that would be my piece of advice.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, so from our Q&A form, some of the competitors have asked, how long on average does it take you to complete a piece, a recipe, or a graphic design?
I can answer for a recipe. Most of the time I am just like, I wake up really hungry for something specific, and then I like make something. I like try to see if I can make it from the ingredients I have, and that will take up to an hour because every step of the way I add something and taste it, and then I'll like write it down, or I'll like sketch out what I want the end product to look like. If that final recipe tastes good enough for me to think that somebody else could follow it, I'll like write it and publish it. And writing a recipe takes much longer than cooking it. It takes at least like 2 to 3 hours actually, because every step of the way I'm thinking psychologically, like what is somebody going to do when they read this step? Like when I say like whisk this until fluffy, I have to like think 3 times about what does fluffy mean to like the average reader. So that actually takes the longest. So I would say at least like a total like 6 to 7 hour process for like a full recipe, like a dessert.
For graphic design, it really varies, because graphic design is like, we call ourselves designers because graphic design is not general enough for us. So you have graphic design, you could be a user experience designer, you could be a packaging designer, you could be a branding designer, you could, like what else? You could be an environmental designer, you could do t-shirts, or you could do merchandise, or you could do advertisements. And that's like just a few things. So everything takes its own amount of time. And the work environment that you're in is usually what factors in for that. So I worked at an agency for 10 months, and we rebranded a studio space. So essentially like a large company. We rebranded the way that their space looks in a matter of just 4 months. So, and technically that should take around 2 years. But it's a high demand work environment, and that's just, you know, like they made us work all day and night. So it really depends. Certain other projects might take a week. They might take a year. It might take for packaging. I did a package for Gillette Venus, the razor brand, when I was an intern at Gray. And I have not seen that in the market yet because it takes a long time to produce. So still waiting to see some of my stuff from, you know, like 2 years ago or like a year and a half ago. So the process really depends. Some things will go quick, some things won't.
And Aisha, would you like to?
Of course. So with a poem, it varies, but I'll talk a little bit more about like a current project that I'm working on. So I'm working on a novel, writing a novel, which we're going to be doing a workshop on, inshallah. And I began writing when the idea came when I was pregnant with my first child, which was about 2 to 3 years ago. And then the planning phase came. I wrote the first draft. It has I am on the 4th draft, almost finished the 4th draft. Inshallah, keep me near the eyes, please. And I have totally revised it like 2 or 3 times already. The first story, the only thing I kept from the very first draft of that novel, of that story, was the ending and one of the characters' name and an idea. And then everything else just kind of changed. That's why they call it revision, basically revisioned the whole thing. But yeah, that's just a part of the process, and I'm happy like at where I am right now, but I'm also still going through changes. So yeah, and I think when you do them earlier drafts, it's so important. Just a word of advice to our creatives. Just, you know, be very wary of the advice that you get from other people, especially when you're doing that first draft and you really are just following your intuition and following your idea for a story or your idea for a piece, or anything. So just kind of like, it's about sitting within yourself and just knowing what is truly your story and not what other people think would sound better in a story. Because trust me, I have had a whole bunch of people tell me, well, I think that this part would be better if it was like this, or I think that this would sound better like this, or do you really want to do a theme in that kind of thing, or that genre doesn't work anymore. And all of these things, they just really disheartened me to a stage where I almost didn't even want to finish writing the book. But then I thought, like, you know, this is why I just need to, because I really cared about these people's advice. So I just got to a stage where I didn't really talk about my ideas of the story, just more looked for inspiration from other places, not from other stories, but more so from other people's expression, you know, like certain poetry, certain movies, even like A Wonderful Life. That's an amazing movie, but it's really old. That's not a but yeah, so all of these things. So I think it's just really important just to be as authentic to yourself as possible, and then obviously get your advice from people who are, you know, expertise in how to write a story, etc. But the body and the content and the soul has to be your own. So that's yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you guys for sharing. It's interesting. It's interesting to see how everyone has a different duration for each creativity. That was our last question for now. We're going to send everyone into breakout rooms.